week we have Amy Fuller from Fuller Life. She is the director and one of the therapists there, and very, very highly trained in what she does. And she's going to be here with us, but also another therapist from Fuller Life is going to be here, and they're going to be talking to us a little bit about grief and grief therapy. And yes.
Quick question before you go further.
Sure.
So the therapists are going to be taking over. You'll be here, or is it
I'll be here.
Facilitating the process?
I'll be here. They're going to do a maybe 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open up for questions and just have a conversation.
Okay, so we can kind of have a little dialogue and we can kind of get more insights.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the
Okay,
piece.
gotcha.
So would love for y'all to know about that resource, and then also just about what they do and what grief therapy looks like, and they'll probably talk about grief in general too. So
Okay.
I'm excited that they're going to be here. I think that'll be a good resource.
Yeah.
I had a question after last week's class. I had a question about what is spiritual direction. And so I thought, I didn't really explain that very well. So we have two spiritual directors on staff. I am a spiritual director, and then also Gerardo Vasquez is a spiritual director as well, which is neat because we can offer that in English and in Spanish. But I had a question about what that is, and could I say a couple words about that? Spiritual direction is a safe place to process your faith experiences, your questions, your doubts, and your relationship with God alongside a trained companion. So that is what it is. It is not mystical or weird, or it is a very comfortable conversation that we have, and we spend some time in prayer. We can do spiritual practices. It's very much what you want it to be, and most of the time it just looks like a conversation. It's not therapy, but it is a way for us to talk about our relationship with God in a safe place. And so a lot of the people that I meet with are processing grief in any number of ways, in addition to all kinds of other questions they have about faith. The goal of spiritual direction is not to give you answers. I probably have fewer answers than you already do, but it's to draw your awareness towards the presence of God in your life. And I feel like we could all use more of that. And sometimes it helps to have another person doing that with you. Sessions are 45 minutes to an hour, and we just meet once a month. It's not intended to be a weekly thing or even every 2 weeks. It's very focused on your relationship with God, and so we just meet monthly. So if that's something you're interested in, we do have two on staff, but we also can refer you. I know several others that are outside, and they can do Zoom meetings and everything. So if that's something you're interested in, we can talk about that with you. Okay. If you have not been here, these are the topics of the weeks that we've done so far. We did intro the first week. Week 2, we did coping with grief. Last week, we talked about grief and faith. Today is children and grief. And then, as I mentioned, next week, we're excited to have Amy Fuller and Jada Washington are both going to be here from Fuller Life, and we can kind of dialogue with them as therapists. If you haven't watched those and you want to go back, they're all on YouTube. So a little bit of recap. We've talked about our working definition of grief. What is grief? It is a response to the loss of someone or something that was important to you. It does not have to be a person. It does not have to be a death. And we talked about this quote: anytime you had a reasonable expectation for your future and that gets taken away. And that happens to us in big ways and in small ways, daily, weekly, and then with some big life events too. It is extremely important to let yourself feel your emotions without judgment. We talked about that when we talked about the week on coping. And then last week, including your feelings about God. It is important to let yourself feel those feelings without judgment. And how do you feel towards God? What are the honest emotions that you feel about God, and expressing those to God as well? Sometimes we are grieving not just the person or the thing we lost, but also a changing faith. The ways that we expected God to interact with us that we don't feel like He did sometimes. That might be a part of your grief journey. So that's part of what we talked about last week also. And then this week we're talking about grief in children. This is not just for parents or caregivers, and it's not even just for people who are working with children, because all of us were children. And So one of the things, initially, I had intended for this week to equip people who are living or working with children, and it will do that, but also, the more that I read and studied, a lot of it felt really relevant to me as an individual, because I was recognizing a lot of things that were coming up for me that I had received as messages as a child. And so it was really helpful to process those. So I think that this will be a good class for us today. Why is grief with children particularly unique and sometimes challenging? So when I did this class with the teens, I asked the question, what do you wish adults knew about teens and grief? And the first response was, we are not like you all. We process grief differently. And the very next response was, we are exactly like you. And both are true. And I think that's why it can be complicated to navigate grief with children, because they are both the same and they have unique challenges that just don't exist in the same way with adults. So some of the things that I thought through, adults are sometimes navigating their own grief. When you're walking alongside a child, you're also processing your own grief, but you're responsible for this other person. And so trying to do both of those simultaneously can be especially challenging. Children are in a learning phase of life, so everything that they experience gets assigned some kind of meaning. They are in the middle of developing their beliefs about the world, and those can carry over to other things in their life. It is a very foundational time for them. Also, their interpretation of circumstances or messages they're receiving is often incomplete because they don't have the life experience to navigate that and to balance that with the rest of the things that they know. So that can be especially challenging. The things that my kids have received as messages is not necessarily what I told them. It's what they put together based on what they knew, which was not as much as what I know because I've lived longer. And then children don't always know how to communicate. They are still figuring that out. And they communicate in all kinds of different ways, and it's not just through words. And then they have short attention spans. I cannot tell you the majority of the conversations that I have had with my kids about grief have been like 20 seconds long, which is a ton of pressure when they bring up a question in the carpool line with 30 seconds left before they get out, and it's like a big existential question about death or about grief, and that's a ton of pressure as a parent to have to say, well, how do I encapsulate this into 20 seconds before you get out of the car? And you might think about it all day, or you might not, and you have no idea. So children can be especially challenging. I want to give a short disclaimer that most of us, I think, have in some way navigated grief with children. And you might hear things today that make you go, oh, I think I handled that wrong. And I want to assure you that you are a safe person for your children, and we are all doing the best that we can. And so I want us to kind of fight that desire to hear something and immediately judge or criticize ourselves. So I want to bring a huge dose of grace and self-compassion into this. Children are resilient, and the most important thing for them is that they have a safe adult. So by being that person, you have done a world of good for them. And life is hard, even when you have safe adults. So I want to mention that. The most common childhood losses, these are the big losses, typically in the order that they might encounter them with most children. And obviously, everyone's circumstance is different. The death of a pet is often first. The death of a grandparent, a major move, divorce, the death of a parent, the death of a playmate, a friend, or relative, or debilitating injury to someone important to them or to them. But also, all of these things they encounter on a regular basis. They didn't make the team. Their friend moved away. They had a breakup. Any changing plans that they didn't expect, or they wanted to do something this weekend and it fell through and they were excited about it. Sibling relationships. They're having challenging relationships with their siblings. Any big family changes, you see this a lot with a new baby. When we had Our second baby, my daughter, who was 5, suddenly started to kick the cat every time she would walk by it. It doesn't make any sense, but there's a grief process in that of figuring out what is my place in the family. And again, they don't know how to communicate that, but there's some kind of expression of that emotion. Academic challenges, if school is really hard for them, friendships at school, bullying, those are huge. And then natural disasters, global societal events, all of those impact our kids. So saw that a lot with COVID and some other things. However, all loss is experienced at 100%. Speaking of the cat, my daughter outwardly, her expression of grief outwardly was much stronger when her cat died than when she lost her dad. On the outside. Does not mean that those losses, you can't compare them in that way, but the way that looked, it was a very odd feeling. It was a very odd experience. But it's because of this. All loss is experienced at 100%, and the cat was her first experience with death. So not only was she experiencing that, she wasn't even very close to the cat. It really wasn't even about the cat. It was about her recognition in that moment of, oh, this is what death is. Oh, this is what could happen to the people that I love. There's a whole lot, I think, with the first loss a child experiences. I think that is a big deal for that reason. But all loss is experienced at 100%, and it's why it's really hard as an adult to kind of navigate, this seems like a small thing, but it's impacting my child in a really big way. And can I validate that for them? I think is really important. Children often process on an emotional level first before they move to an intellectual level. So what does that mean? The child wants to have a conversation with you. If they say, so for example, why did this person die? Well, why did this happen? They may be asking you, tell me the circumstances, tell me the physical reasons. Most of the time they're not. Most of the time they're asking more of a, this is how I feel. I want to talk about this on an emotional level. If you haven't addressed the emotional piece of it, it's going to be really hard to get to the intellectual piece. And they may be interested in that later, but initially there are emotions that they need to be validated. Okay. The way the child's grief is received and responded to teaches them how to navigate future losses. That feels like a huge amount of pressure. But to remove a little bit of that pressure, here are all the ways, and probably more, that children learn how to navigate grief from. So all of these different places, parents and caregivers are a huge source of that, but also other adults, family members, teachers, their friends, movies and television, social media, all of the influences in their life are teaching them how to navigate grief and loss based on how they respond to the child's situation. So here is the problem. Many of us received unhelpful messages about grief and loss when we were children. And so now that we are navigating that with children, it is very easy to pass on what we know, and that's not our fault. That's what we received, that's what was given to us, and that's why it's really important to look at some of those things with a critical lens and think, is that the most helpful? Because what I believe and the way that I perceive the world is going to come into the way that I interact with this child. So I thought it might be interesting to go through 6 common grief myths. And I do want to say most of this content came from a book, I think it's over here. It's called When Children Grieve, and I highly, highly recommend it. It is fantastic. So a lot of this material is from there, and there's a ton in there that I couldn't bring in, but it would be really valuable to read it. It was stuff that I had not read in some other resources, so really do highly recommend that book. So as we go through these 6 things, here's what I want you to think about as we discuss it. Did you receive this message as a child? Some of them you may have, and some of them you may not have. And what is the problem with this message? Okay, so here's the first one. Don't feel bad. Do you feel like you received that message as a child? And what is the problem with this message?
Denying reality.
It's denying reality.
Even though they tell you don't feel bad, that don't stop you from feeling bad.
Yeah, it doesn't stop the emotions
It
that
don't
you're
stop
feeling.
the emotion and the pain.
It just ignores that you're going through this.
Mhm.
It minimizes what you're going through as a child. I mean, that happens with most kids, they get ignored.
And what I hear, if I hear that message, what that tells me is not, it's not that I'm, like you said, it's not I'm gonna stop feeling bad, but it tells me that this is not a person I can express that to, which shuts down that connection and communication. Children need to feel bad when their hearts are broken. It is an interesting thing that if a child comes home and says, oh, this happened to me, we really do want to make them feel better. And I think that comes from a well-intentioned place, but it comes out of us having received that message that it's not okay to feel bad. And so we may try to, oh, there's, but you have this to look forward to, or, oh, don't, but it's going to be better tomorrow, or whatever response we want to give. But imagine if the opposite were true. So if your child comes home and is excited because they made straight A's on their report card, you would never respond, well, just wait till next time because it's probably going to be worse. That doesn't make any sense, but for some reason, we want to validate happy emotions and good emotions we perceive as good, and it's okay to feel those, but we don't do the same with the emotions that are hard and that are big and that are maybe more negative. And so isn't it interesting that we give space for one but not another, because you would never say that. And I think that does come from a well-intentioned place, but it is hard to navigate that in ourselves because we're uncomfortable, I think, with sadness and with grief and with hurt. Okay, second one, replace the loss. So you see this a lot with pets. So if a pet dies, and hey, we'll get another one. How about this weekend we go get another? Possessions. If a bike is stolen and you're trying to fix it. It's an effort to fix it. Or with breakups, there's plenty of fish in the sea. It's okay. Someone better will come along. Do you feel like you received that message, and or what is the problem with that message?
I have. Twice. I had parakeets and a foster dog, and both parakeets died. I didn't want any more because it was like a human loss. And my grandson number 2 came to the house with 2 more parakeets. I wasn't ready, but I accepted them. Then I had a chihuahua for almost 20 years. And when Ozzy died, it was like a human, because that was mine. And everybody kept saying, you need to get another dog. I'm going to send you a dog. I'm going to buy you a dog. I told him no. That's his loss. It's just a dog. You think, oh, just a dog, but it wasn't.
There is some research that talks about how it can be actually harder a lot of times to experience the death of a pet that meant a lot to you because it's not socially acceptable to grieve in the same way as it would be if it were a human. Even though you still had a very strong emotional bond with that animal, but you can't for 6 months tell someone I'm grieving my dog that died. It's not socially, that's not okay.
Part of that is it's not, there are different kinds of pet owners, and for some people, pets are family, that's true. And for some people, it's just that thing in the yard that we feed, that guards the house and tells us when burglars are here. So you would never say that about family members, that, oh, But if for that person,
Yes,
this was that kind of thing.
that's right. That's right, go ahead.
I look at that in the last days, the last one to break up, yeah, I guess all of us probably did go through break up. But I received better advice from a female than I would from a male, because the male would say, suck it up. I'll be a man, you're not a man, and say, deal with this thing,
Yes.
and a female is more sympathetic, and I think that's feelings
Yeah,
are.
you need some time
Yeah.
before we're not ready to just move on, to move to the next step. But we have to sit in that group. We have to feel those things. Grieve alone. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the first one of don't feel bad. Sometimes what happens, especially with a family that has experienced a loss, is that the parent will not want to show their emotions to their children. So they will isolate. If I start to cry, oh, I'm gonna go into my room and not show that. But the message that sends to the child is that you grieve on your own. You don't do that in front of other people. And that can be really, really hard. Do you feel like you heard that as a child, or you received that, or what is the problem with that?
Personal experience, I did that very same thing. It is damaging to children. It also tells them that it's not important to you. This is strictly for me. What you're feeling doesn't matter. Very bad.
And it's hard. It's hard to bring all of those emotions into a conversation with a child when you're struggling to.
And sometimes you feel like you're protecting the child,
Right.
and you're not.
I think all of these do come from a well-intentioned place.
I did my grief so that I didn't make my daughters happy.
You don't want to make them sad. You hate to see them sad.
You know, every time my grandson sees me, my middle one, do you still have rocks in your belly? Do you still have rocks in your belly? And it kills me. That's what he remembers.
Yeah.
When I lost my son, I went into the depression, didn't know what grief was, and the whole 9 yards. And my kids came around the bed, because I had got to the point I didn't want to get out of bed. And they stood around the bed and they said, Mom, and I just kind of laid there looking. They said, we're still here.
Yeah.
We are still here. And I think it took that to snap me out of where I was going.
And for me, it was just the opposite. It was, I have other children, I can't fall apart. I can't give in to this because I've got other children.
What a powerful message it is to a child when an adult says, I'm not okay. It offers them permission to also not be okay, because they're probably also not okay. But is it okay to verbalize that? And so if I model that as a parent, it offers permission for them to do that as well. I loved these quotes about David Kessler said, grief must be witnessed. You cannot feel grief in isolation. It has to be witnessed by somebody. That is very, very important, because we're communal people. We're people that find community and find strength in other people, and that really matters. And then I love this image. This is from the book When Children Grieve. Adopt the image of being a heart with ears. Imagine, when you're talking to that child, that I am listening from an emotional space, and I am hearing you. Being a heart with ears. I loved the idea of that. All right, be strong. This is a really hard one. Kids are often told, especially when a parent dies, you need to be strong for your mom now, or you need to be strong for the people around you, and or they witness their parents trying to do the same thing. Kind of goes hand in hand with the other one we just talked about. Witness their parents trying to be strong, and that is really, really hard.
For me, children may not understand it this way, but it's basically what's happening. You're telling the child that you need to carry the burden for everybody who's hurting. Be strong.
And sometimes that happens without even being
Yeah.
told that. And, we've navigated that a little bit, and that's challenging. That's challenging when a child genuinely wants to help, but they step up into a role that maybe isn't theirs to take on.
Right.
Yeah. They need to keep being a kid.
That's what I was thinking.
But it's
Their
hard.
position.
How about keep busy? We can do this a lot in grief. There are legitimately times when we cannot fall apart because we have to keep our lives going. But I think that is different from, oh, if I just keep busy enough, if I just keep, it's distraction is what it is. Distraction from the grief. I just keep busy enough, I keep, maybe I take on more projects. Maybe I pour my emotions into this new hobby, or the way that I'm gonna care for other people, or I'm gonna suddenly take on a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
Leigh Ann, I was gonna say about keeping busy is always a good, like you say, distraction. But anytime you see something like out there, like not, I would say emotion, but somebody has a panic attack or nervousness, that's kind of to me abnormal. That's when, how do you say or you rationalize that within a group or a family? Because the simple fact is, I mean, you gotta address it eventually.
Mhm.
And maybe
Yes, you
something of
have-
a, I
yes.
think it's part of something of a deeper matter that's gotta be remedied somehow.
Yeah, so those things that you're not addressing because you're distracting yourself don't go away. They're
Yeah.
still there, they're underlying, and at some point, they will come out.
They bubble up like a volcano, and
That's
then
right.
you will deal with it at some point. So it's
That's
like,
right.
you gotta try to not forget, but kind of deal with it before it gets to that point.
That's right,
Yeah.
so that goes hand in hand
Yeah.
with this quote. You can stay busy all day, but when you finally stop and lie down at night, you're liable to find the same pain in your heart that was there yesterday and the day before. It doesn't go away. And you can keep pushing it off, but that doesn't feel good either. It takes a ton of emotional energy to hold that grief in. And so you're actually not being as productive in your life as you could be if you dealt with that and then you lived out of that space.
I had a question.
Yes.
Keeping busy, keeping distracted, that's probably some way to have a better distraction, but it's like, from what I'm getting is you just learn to kind of not cope, but deal with this.
Yeah, we're not addressing the actual root emotions that we're feeling. It's an effort to avoid those things,
Okay.
yeah. And there's healthy ways that are action oriented to work through that grief. And that can be different, and those are things to sort out, individually, but, yeah, but just distracting is only avoiding the emotions that we're feeling. All right, the last one, time heals all wounds. Have you heard this? What's wrong with that?
That's a yes and no.
Yes and no, say more.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's, I don't know, try to put it in perspective, is that as time goes on, you will forget it. And that's what I'm not saying this is the truth, but this is what when they say time heals all wounds, that as time goes on, you are going to forget it. It's gonna drop off, and I think that's what it is.
I think it turns into something, shopping, a filler of some sort.
I think, yeah, go ahead.
As far as that time goes, there are people who say to you, you should be over this by now. You've had plenty of time. That was a month ago, that was 6 months ago.
Yes.
You should be over this.
That people's perception of time and how that should work with grief is very interesting. Because it is equally harmful to say, oh, you should be over this by now, you should be done grieving by now, and to tell someone, you will grieve this loss forever.
Yeah.
You will never get over, a lot of times you hear this with the loss of a child, you will never get over the loss of a child. And I understand what that means, but
Everybody in their own time.
it is kind of this feeling that there's nothing you can do about this. There's no process, you're not gonna be able to cope with this grief. And that's not true either. You will process that grief. You will always love and miss them. That is true. But it should look different than the way it looked at the beginning. That's also true.
Unless you build a shrine, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, you can't heal.
Yeah, it's good.
It's like a wound. It's like going through surgery. even though before you get to surgery, you're already hurting or whatever situation that may come. When you get that surgery, it's not going to be healed right away. It's going to take time, but each day, that wound feels better and better and better. That don't ever mean you forgot that wound. The scars are still there for remembrance, but you get better.
Yeah, the way I would rather say this is time heals some wounds.
Yes.
But there are wounds that if you just giving it time without dealing with it is going to do nothing. It's like if you get a flat tire and you say, well, I'm just gonna let time pass and wait for this to fix itself. Generally, I don't know about your experience, generally, that's not happening. You're going to have to do a little bit of work to be able to get moving. And so time by itself isn't going to be the answer. The time and whatever it is, and processing that grief, and working through it, and allowing yourself to feel those things, and being honest, is how you're going to move through it. Okay, if you did not get, I have a few more of these scriptures. If you didn't get a scripture sheet. Thank you. Okay, so, oh, I didn't keep one for myself. Okay, so, as it turns out, it's difficult to find a scripture, a story, that kind of speaks to the grief of children. I think one of those reasons might be the way that children were viewed for a lot of human history, and the place that they held in society, and that just doesn't seem to be the central character in most stories. However, I found this story to be very interesting in thinking through the lens of grief, and especially processing grief with children. So here are the questions I want you to think about as we read this story. What strikes you as you think about Moses' mother's grief? Her name is Jochebed. How do you imagine these events impacted Miriam, who is Moses' sister? And are there other ways grief may have impacted this family? All right, so starting in Exodus chapter 1, verse 22. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. Every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. So thinking about these questions, what strikes you about this story?
Moses' mom had a double grief.
Yeah, say more about that.
The first one was having to save his life by letting him go. And the second one was, once she knew him, she had to let him go again.
Yeah, so when I read this, I agree with you. There were actually 3 moments that I thought she experienced grief. When she first had Moses, she didn't know she was having a boy or a girl, and she knew legally this is what should happen. And I could only imagine the grief that she felt at hearing that he is a boy. There is a loss there immediately. And then setting him in the river, she didn't know if she would see him again. She didn't know if he would be eaten by a wild animal. She didn't know. The idea of someone finding him was way down on that list of things that could have happened. And so she was letting him go, probably to his death. in her mind. So this is this second loss. And then this third loss, she's having to give him up after nursing him and let him live with Pharaoh's daughter as her son, where she doesn't even get to call him her son anymore.
I think you could say the fourth was the fact that it's Pharaoh's daughter, and he's being raised as someone who
Yes,
is
he's not even being raised as a person of his own culture. Yeah, I love it.
not knowing how he would turn out.
Yeah, think about Miriam. How do you think this experience may have, and we don't know, but this is imaginative. Can you imagine being Miriam, and I don't know how old she was, but your mother is going through these consecutive griefs, and you are losing your brother. You are losing something too. And I don't know if people didn't pay attention to her. I don't know if people did pay attention to her. I don't know if they talked about it. But her experience would have been so interesting too. And I wonder if she was ignored, or I wonder if her mom talked to her about that, and I wonder if she felt like she could express those emotions, or what she did with that.
She had to keep that secret.
That's
It
right.
had to be a burden.
Yeah, that secret would be a burden on her whole life.
Another thing too, in her position, she was grieving her little brother, but she was a guardian of him. She wanted to make sure he was treated well. She wanted to make sure that no one hurt him. Even when he was put into the mound, she was there. She was watching. She probably was aware.
And I wonder if her going to watch and make sure he was safe was a response to watching her mother go through that grief. She thinks, this is something I can do. I'm gonna step into, I don't know that anyone asked her to do that, but that she took on her own initiative. I'm going to watch, because that's all she can do.
She was smart, because she went right there. She was the one suggested her mom to breastfeed,
Yeah.
you know?
I'm wondering, was there some angst about if somebody finds out that we didn't get rid of this baby, are the rest of us in danger?
Well, and I imagine what those 3 months were like. And what a traumatic experience it would be to hide a baby for 3 months in your house, knowing that at any moment, your entire family could be in danger.
Not hearing crying.
Someone might hear him crying. That is a long time to feel those things and have that anxiety and that fear. Yeah. So here are a few things as I read through, here's some things that I pulled out of it. A collective grief is already present for the Israelite people. So as a people, they are in this situation where not only are they slaves, but now this edict has been given by Pharaoh, which is devastating. And so as a people group, they are all grieving. There's already this collective overshadowing grief that Moses' family is living under. Jochebed losing Moses multiple times, and then a fourth time that you mentioned that I thought was really good. Miriam witnesses her mother's response to multiple losses, and I imagine that experience had a deep impact on her. I wondered if anyone was listening to Miriam as she grieved, or if she felt like she had to do that on her own. Yeah.
As the other boy in the family, I'm wondering what was going on in Aaron's head.
Me too, yeah.
Survivor's guilt, or whatever he might have been.
Yeah, and was he born at late? I don't know. I don't know.
Did he just get lucky,
Yeah,
or
did
is
they
that
tell
gonna
his
come from
story?
him, or,
I have many questions.
You know, I have questions too, because I think about all during this particular time, they was killing the boys.
Yeah,
But
that's right.
yet during Moses' time, he was safe. Was it because it was Pharaoh's sister's child that she
Yes.
claimed?
And this last point I think is really important. The knowledge that Moses is safe does not take away the pain of loss. There is relief that he is safe. Jochebed feels, I'm sure, relief that he is safe. This was a path towards survival for him, and her child gets to grow up and survive, but that doesn't mean she feels that loss any less. And that's the difference between an intellectual knowing and an emotional feeling. And those two things don't always coincide, and that is okay, and that is normal.
We have worked through this story, through foster and adoption. And Jaden has an older half-sister who had to make the hard call that his parents had overdosed. And that knowledge that he was gonna be safe, didn't help in having to make that decision. And so this story, is also foster and adoption too.
And that can create a lot of shame if we don't recognize that that can be true. Because we think, well, I should feel happy about, or should not feel sad because they're safe, or whatever the situation is. I shouldn't feel the way I feel because the facts are X, Y, and Z. And it doesn't work that way. And so being able to release that shame and that judgment and accept that this is how I feel. This is the way that I feel. These are the facts and these are the emotions. And they may not make any sense to me or to somebody else. Yeah, I think that's good. Any other comments on the story before we move? The presence of safe, caring adults in a child's life matters. And it does not even have to be a parent or a caregiver, but somebody in the child's life, somebody that they feel safe with, just that presence does matter. The way they reflect healthy responses to the experiences in the child's life. So they did a study of children in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina that had survived the trauma of that experience. And so they found that children who fared the best 7 years later were the ones who'd had the most supportive connections. And it could be family members, it could be teachers, pastors, shelter workers. And by contrast, those who fared worse had lacked any constructive connections. And then the ones who kind of floundered marginally, kind of in between, they had only one person. One person is better than no people, but multiple people is better than one person. And there's research that also talks about the value of children having a safe adult outside of their family and outside of their parent or their caregiver, and how important that is, that they have somebody else that they can lean on and they can trust and they feel safe with. That's not a parent, and those are all so important. Which I want to say to affirm you all that you may not be a parent working through this with a child, but you may be in a child's life, and that really does matter. That really does matter. Okay, so the last thing I wrote down, kind of a non-exhaustive list. You may have other ideas from your own experiences, but some suggestions for supporting children through grief. Using direct language. Just about anything that you read will tell you to use direct language, especially on the topic of death. It's really tempting for us to want to say this person went to heaven, this person went to be with Jesus, because it feels really cruel to be blunt. And it's well-intentioned and we want to protect the child, but because they don't understand a lot of these concepts, it can be really scary and create anxiety. Oh, they went to sleep. Well, when are they going to be back? Well, why does Jesus need them? I mean, you can get into all kinds of confusion, and it's really important for children to understand this is what happened. And it doesn't have to be a long explanation, but being very direct with honest language about that somebody died really matters. Tell the emotional truth about yourself. So that brings into play kind of a lot of the things we were talking about how important it is. And you don't have to share everything with them, and you don't need to lean on your child to support you, because you should have people supporting you, but being honest about, yeah, I feel sad today too. Or I sometimes think about that person and I miss them, or and sometimes initiating that in that way helps the child know that it's safe for them to also explain that to you. Talk about emotions and give permission to express emotions. Kind of goes hand in hand with that. sometimes helping them name emotions too. And even in yourself, like, these are some of the ways that I feel. Do you feel that way sometimes? Or helping them name what they might be feeling. And they'll correct you if you're wrong. But those can be really good conversations to have. Work through your own beliefs and messaging about grief and loss, which is a lot of kind of what we've done. So we went through it pretty quickly, but what are those things out of those 6 myths? And there might be others, but like sitting with that and what are the things that I have received when it comes to what's acceptable to process grief and what's acceptable to express to other people. Because without digging into that, we will inadvertently pass those things on to others that we're walking alongside, including children. And so it just perpetuates some of those cycles of shame and people not knowing how to talk about it or not knowing how to create space for it and that discomfort. So that work is really, really important. Remembering that every child is different, noticing the child's unique needs and communication styles. So when my husband died, my kids were 10 years old and 5 years old and 10 months old. So those are 3 not only very different ages and very different developmental stages, but also they're opposite genders. And so there's a girl, boy, girl, and they're all different personalities. Even if they were all the same, even if they were triplets, they would have 3 different ways of processing that. And so being curious about how that particular child is wanting to express things and wanting to process things is really important. And sometimes you don't understand because it doesn't make a lot of sense to you. My oldest was very talkative about it, and she had a lot of memories, and she had a lot of questions and wanted to talk about it. And my son was 5, and he barely said a word, and he never cried, and he didn't, from the outside, you wouldn't know a whole lot was happening. But I want to show you what he did. He died right before kind of Halloween, and we had watched the movie Coco several times. My kids had had that foundation of what an ofrenda was, and on his own, without talking about it, without using any words at all, he set up things that reminded him of, and he only asked me to move the picture. He's like, this is really heavy, can you move this? And he would put things there that reminded him of Dad, and it completely wordless. And then, the reason I put 2 is because he would move things around every day. He would add something, or he would take something away, or he would change the order. And it was so interesting to watch and think, oh, he is processing, but he's not talking, and that's okay. And so we left this up a ridiculously long time. I waited a long time before I finally said, okay, are you okay if we put this away? But this was his way of processing. And so trying to engage with that at some level, but also giving him the permission to do that on his own and knowing I'm here, but it's okay for you to do this on your own too. So every child is so, so different, and bringing that curiosity into your parenting and into the way you're interacting with them can be so helpful. Okay, using children's books to discuss hard topics. So I brought a few to add to this book table that you're welcome to look through. There's like a journal for older kids, there's some books for younger kids. And those can be really helpful when we are not sure we trust our words, because we know we have all these messages or we don't know how to explain things. Books can be so helpful. The book over here on the end called The Rabbit Listened is one of my favorites, and it's about how to support other people when they're grieving. And it uses animals, and it's just, it's a really, really sweet book. So finding books that help you explain that to children and talk with children about the way that they're feeling can be really helpful. Respond to the real question. So this a lot of times kids will ask a question and you think this is the biggest, a huge psychological, there's so much, that I need to explain, and there's some background, and that's not actually, they don't want to know all of that. They want to know this little one detail over here. They just asked a really broad question. So sometimes asking clarifying questions, are you wanting to know, even the question about why did this person die? Okay, are you wanting to know specifically the facts that happened as to why and what the doctor said? Or are you wanting to know why in the world these things happen? Or are you wanting to know something completely different? Because sometimes they don't know how to communicate that in that way. And you would hate to have to spend 30 minutes trying to explain something that they're not asking, and they won't give you 30 minutes to do that anyway. Check in with them. Do not assume that they will initiate, because a lot of times they don't know how, and they don't have those communication skills. And so checking in with them, not forcing them to interact or to talk about it, but just, do you want to talk about it? How are you feeling? Giving them resources if they want that. It may feel like a repetitive process with a big loss. As children get older, they move into different developmental stages, and they will have to process it again. And so a lot of times it will feel like, you don't just have one conversation about it with kids. You have multiple conversations as they get older, and they want to think about it in new ways, and maybe they want to start reading books about it that they didn't before, or they want to talk more in depth, or they weren't interested in that part before, but now it matters to them. And so it feels sometimes like a repetitive process that we have to have the same conversations over and over again, but that's really healthy and that's really good. And then consider things like play therapy and support groups. It can matter a lot to kids that they're not the only one. We found that out, that my daughter for a while felt very isolated because she thought, well, none of my friends have ever been through this. Nobody I know has ever been through this, and no one really knows how I feel. And so by joining a support group, she met other kids that had all experienced the same kind of loss that she had. And she felt like they understand what I'm going through, and I can talk about this with them, and that feels safe. So highly recommend that. I want to end with this quote, because I think what we most want is to protect our kids from pain, and we would love to be able to do that. But you cannot shield yourself or your children from losses in the future. But by creating the safety to communicate the normal and painful feelings about loss, you are giving your children a solid foundation for dealing with the painful events that will occur from time to time throughout all of their lives. That is a reality of our lives, and you are giving them a gift by allowing them to do this. Avoiding it is not going to protect them, but by offering that safe emotional space, you are giving them the tools that they need, and that is a gift. So let me pray for you, and then we'll be done. God, thank you for just the time that you've given us today to talk about hard things and talk about, think about the kids that we love and the role that adults have played in our lives when we were children, and the roles that maybe we play in some other children's lives. And I just thank you for the blessing of being here together and the discussion that we had. And I pray that you will continue to bless the rest of our class together, and thank you for the gift that all of these people are